Amtrak employee Bruce Phillips is the first crash victim to file a lawsuit against his employer after train 188 derailed. He was in the rear of the train. He was commuting back to New York, and his injuries are reportedly extensive, including a traumatic brain injury. But here is the legal twist that could impact Phillips' lawsuit and others if they choose to go the same route and file suit against Amtrak. Amtrak's liability for the crash in Philadelphia may be capped at $200 million. And the question of whether that will be enough to compensate the victims is already looming over this tragedy. Remember, 200 were injured, 8 people were killed. Joining me now from Philadelphia is attorney Michael Olley, who is representing Bruce Phillips. Mr. Olley, thanks so much for being with us. If you could just answer first and foremost, how is your client doing today?
He's doing better. He's been released from the hospital, which is good news. He's got a long road ahead of him. He still has a major concussion. He's got orthopedic and neurological injuries. Will be out of work for some period of time, but will hopefully work towards a recovery.
So obviously at this very early stage, even the NTSB has said it doesn't know exactly what happened and why the train sped up. It could be mechanical, it could be an issue with the operator, it could be a lot of different things. We also know that positive train control would have stopped it, but it wasn't there. So with all of these looming questions, and that's just the tip of the iceberg really, who are you suing exactly, and how can you be so sure you're going after the right party?
Well, the right party in this case is Amtrak. Amtrak is his employer. His situation is a little different in that he is covered under a law called the Federal Employers Liability Act, which pertains to railroad employees. Mr. Phillips was actually on his way to work at Penn Station. And under that law, the railroad is absolutely required to provide him with a safe place to work. The fact that the train was going in excess of twice the legal limit is a violation of federal regulations, and as a matter of law, Amtrak would be strictly liable to Mr. Phillips and the other Amtrak crew members with regard to that claim.
And what about the notion that we don't know what caused that to happen? I mean, God forbid that this was some kind of tampering issue. Would that still be a liability issue for Amtrak if it was completely out of Amtrak's control?
It may not under the Federal Employers Liability Act, in that even if the equipment is defective in some way, if it's been tampered with, there's case law to support the fact that the railroad would still be liable to Mr. Phillips and the other crew members in that situation. I haven't heard any evidence or allegation that the equipment was tampered with. We're simply going by the NTSB findings to date, first and foremost of which is the fact that this train was going 106 miles an hour in a 50-mile-an-hour zone, and there are FRA regulations that specifically limit restricted speed in certain areas, and this was a clear violation of that requirement.
Can I ask you, is there any merit to the notion that the liability for what happened, and then of course for what did not happen, meaning a control was not on the track to slow that train down, no matter what made it speed up? Would you extend that liability to, say, the FCC or to Congress? Because there are a lot of people pointing fingers and blaming parties for being sluggish in getting that positive train control on that section of track. Does that make sense to you?
Well, not necessarily, because the Amtrak did have a certain period of time within which to complete positive train control. They've been doing it throughout the Northeast Corridor. For whatever reason, they did not do it in this particular area, although it was in effect going southbound, coming from New York into Philadelphia. There's a concept in the law called federal preemption. And to make an argument that maybe the railroad should have done more than what Congress may have mandated or required, you're going to get into a legal battle based upon federal preemption. I'm not saying it can't be, that hurdle can't be overcome, but it's going to be a legal issue. This case is in federal court. I suspect that all of these cases ultimately will wind up in federal court, most likely in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania.
I don't want to get too far into the weeds. Sorry, I just didn't want to get too far into the weeds, but I think, I was reading a piece in the New York Times this morning, and it talks about how Amtrak's been working feverishly to try to get this done, to try to get those positive train controls even on that section of track. The gear is there. The switch ain't on. And effectively, it's because the federal government did not give them the freedom to get those radio airwaves, just to talk simplistically about it. It forced them to go out and buy them all from private companies, which was a very sluggish and lengthy process. And not only that, there's also this technical need to make it homogeneous. All railways need to be able to use the same stuff, even though they don't have the same equipment. And Congress did not respond to at least one of the requests to boost the funding so that they could make that happen. Do you see where I'm going? Like, there seems to be a lot of blame that goes right towards the federal government.
I see where you're going. I mean,
we know you can't sue the feds over that.
Right. Correct. And,
so ultimately,
do you feel like
Amtrak's hands were tied?
Well, that's certainly what we would expect Amtrak to argue in this situation. But what you have to look at is the fact that even before you get to the issue of positive train control, you've got a situation where, for whatever reason, that locomotive went from 70 miles an hour to 106 miles an hour in a period of 39 seconds and reached a speed of 106 miles an hour on a curved track where the speed restriction was 50 miles an hour. So granted, positive train control maybe could have stopped that situation, but the real issue is what brought on that situation. Why was that train, why was that locomotive going at that speed in excess of twice the limit?
Michael Olley, it's good to talk to you. We'll watch your case. We'll see what happens, and certainly I think a lot of eyes, certainly at your firm as well, want to know what the NTSB comes up with. Thanks very much for being with us.